Good morning. Welcome to session 2 of Jews of Lithuania. You'll be happy to know that there will be less history and more personal stories. If you watch my Morocco presentation, you may remember that it started off with a picture of me on a camel in the Sahara Desert. In Lithuania, there was nothing as exotic. I had to settle for these 3 silly photos. Please remember to stay muted and hold any questions or comments until the end of the presentation, which will last about 45 minutes. I very much appreciated all of your comments last week, and I have a few updates. But first, a disclaimer. I am not a historian, but I love history. And I'm not an expert on Lithuania, but I find it fascinating and have tried to be as accurate as possible. Someone asked, how many Jews would be alive today if the Holocaust hadn't happened? According to one professor, a demographer whose name is Pergola, there would be 32 million Jews worldwide instead of the current 13 million. I found out that my pronunciation of Vilna Gaon is evidently incorrect, although it's the way I learned it as a child from my mother. Remember, she also thought we were related to him. Evidently, she was wrong on both counts. The pronunciation is closer to Gaon or Gaon. Thanks to David Goldberg in Ireland, I read up even more on the attempts of Jews of the Russian Empire to get out of military service. And David, I still come to the same conclusion. It is a very complex subject, with some historians saying that it never happened and others saying that there is too much anecdotal evidence to discount what some may have done. David, I hope you're there, and if you are, perhaps you can list the book you recommended under chat. We are going to visit the 3 largest cities in Lithuania, Vilna, Kovno, and finally, we'll go to Klaipeda, which is on the Baltic Sea. The word largest is relative. Vilna has a population of 542,000, Kovno 375,000, and Klaipeda 192,000. The total population of Lithuania is 2,800,000. Today, between 2,700 and 6,500 are Jews. I'm not sure why the range is so large. The name Vilna comes from the Vilna River, but it is the Neris River, 171 miles long and beginning in northern Belarus. It runs through Vilna on its way to Kovno. Along its banks near Vilna are burial places of the pagan Lithuanians. We happen to be in Vilna on Midsummer's Day, known as, and I'm not sure how to pronounce it, Joninės. It marks the longest day and the shortest night of the year. Lithuanian girls collect flowers to make colorful crowns, and boys make wreaths of oak. When night comes, single people throw their crowns and wreaths into the river. If any wreath floats besides a flower crown, it means that those 2 people will marry each other by the end of the year. When I saw vendors selling wreaths throughout the city, I had to buy one and throw it in the river, although at the time I had no idea of this significance. And it didn't matter anyway, since I was already married. Okay, I lied about the history. I have to talk a little bit more about it. The earliest settlements in the area of present-day Vilna are of Mesolithic origin. Archaeological findings prove that the area has been inhabited by peoples of various cultures since the early Middle Ages. The city was first mentioned as Vilna in written sources in 1323 as the capital city of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania in the letters of Gediminas. Remember him? He was the one who invited the Jews to come to Lithuania. Before World War II, there were 100,000 Jews in Vilna, 45% of the population, almost half. Vilna had 105 synagogues and prayer houses. There were 6 daily Jewish newspapers. Yiddish was the language of choice. Indeed, the city was aptly named the Jerusalem of the North. And at that time, throughout Lithuania, there were 200 Jewish communities with a total of about 240,000 people. Sadly, most of the 200 pre-war communities were decimated, wiped off the map entirely. Today, there is only one Jewish newspaper, few people speak Yiddish anymore, and there remains exactly one synagogue in Vilna. Okay, why do I call the city Vilna instead of Vilnius, its current name? Here's the answer. At the Jewish tourist office, and yes, there is one, we went down steep stairs to a dark, dank, very small room without natural light, a hiding place for Jews trying to escape during World War II. Coming up to the light, we met Dovid Katz, a most interesting character originally from New York, whose passion is Vilna and Yiddish. He came to Lithuania to record stories of people who still spoke Yiddish and to teach at the university. When I said something about Vilnius and Kaunas, he literally exploded, saying, "For the sake of your grandparents' memories, call the places Vilna and Kovno, their Yiddish names." He is well known, and we were very lucky to have run into him. I suggest you Google him if you want to learn more about him and what he's done. Dovid was responsible for one of the most memorable experiences we had in Lithuania, which I'll tell you about later. The first stop on our 2012 tour was the Holocaust Museum, known as the Greenhouse, because that's what it is, a greenhouse. For over 2 hours, an elderly woman, a Holocaust survivor, took us through 4 small rooms. We were cautioned not to ask anything about her personal experiences. She showed us videos of interviews of survivors of mass killings outside of Vilna and interviews of their killers. I wanted to kick one man in the balls, but unfortunately he had been dead for a long time. With a cigarette dangling from his lips and an inane smile on his face, he related almost proudly how he refused to help a young Jewish woman from his village with whom he used to dance and socialize. The story did not have a happy ending for her, but he showed no remorse. Close by was the Museum of Tolerance, which had exhibits on history, Judaica, and modern art. On the main floor was a wonderful art exhibit by a Litvak artist, Raphael Quoles. At the time, I knew nothing about him, but I loved his paintings. I found out later that he was a very famous and prolific artist and teacher who survived the Holocaust by fleeing to Russia. When the Nazis left Vilna, he returned and painted scenes of the ruined ghetto. Throughout his lifetime, he won many prestigious prizes, and his works are on exhibit in museums nationwide, worldwide. I think now is a good time to mention other, more well-known artists who were born in Lithuania. Al Jolson, Jascha Heifetz, Marc Chagall. I'm fudging a little with Marc Chagall because he was born in Belarus, but Jews like my grandparents frequently crossed the border between the two countries. In addition, there are many, many famous people whose ancestors came from Lithuania. Ben Bernanke, Benjamin Netanyahu, Abba Eban, Ehud Barak, Sacha Baron Cohen, Michael Bloomberg, Leonard Cohen, Bob Dylan, Aaron Copland, Charles Bronson, who spoke only Lithuanian and Russian until he was a teenager, and the singer Pink. Now, let's continue our tour of the museum. Upstairs were many Jewish artifacts, including the Ark from the destroyed Great Synagogue of Vilna, where they're currently doing an impressive and massive archaeological dig, which we'll visit shortly. The most moving exhibit was a memorial to the children who perished in the Holocaust. The walls of a tiny 3-by-3-foot room were lined with their faces, while a plaintive anthem played in the background. In the absence of graves, but in the Jewish tradition, we placed stones beneath the pictures. We were happy to be on our way to visit the Jewish Community Center to find out what was happening with Vilna's Jews today. The Jewish Community Center in Vilna has a school for 200 children, supports senior Jews with extremely limited income, and provides a gathering place for Vilna's Jews. Simon, who was the head of the center at the time of my first visit, had two goals: to feed the hungry and to encourage Jewish education. He spoke about how difficult it was to maintain Judaism in Soviet times. Although his grandfather, who didn't live in Vilna, was a Moil, he could not have performed Simon's circumcision because the Soviets would have been suspicious if he had come to town. His parents had to use, according to him, a very old Moil with shaky hands. Simon said the circumcision was a success because he is now the father of two healthy children. A Jewish restaurant owner donates a room to feed the needy elderly in the back of his commercial restaurant. We visited at lunchtime, and since it was Friday, they did an early Shabbat service with candles, wine, and challah. I communicated in broken Yiddish with the delightful man sitting next to me. Although our group didn't participate in the meal, he offered his one glass of wine to me. I was quite moved because I guessed it was the only wine he would have had all week until the next Shabbat. We were then divided into small groups to visit private homes. While other groups visited pleasant homes where they were served cake and fresh strawberries, we visited the poorest of the poor. The following is directly from my blog at the time, and as I reread it, I felt that perhaps I was too judgmental, but it is an accurate description of what I experienced. A mother, father, 8-year-old daughter, uncle, and grandmother lived in a 400-year-old building with 2 rooms and a kitchen about 2 by 3 feet. The bathroom was outside. Most of the family slept in lounge chairs because there was only one bed. Their monthly income was $180. The Jewish community subsidized them with the equivalent of food stamps and firewood. Now for the rest of the story. Although their living conditions were appalling, they had 3 TVs, 2 computers, 2 dogs, and ashtrays filled with cigarettes. It was just a major disconnect for me. We next visited an 83-year-old man who lived in even worse squalor. His home consisted of 1 main room with a bed, a teeny kitchen, and an indoor but dirty, smelly toilet. While he stood very erect and had lovely white hair, a pleasant face, and an outgoing personality, he flirted with us, delighted to be visited by 5 women. His clothes were filthy. Later, our guide told us that the Jewish community had tried in the past to help him clean up, but he didn't follow through. His beloved dog had been killed in a fire. He got a cat to replace it. He had no other family. He was remarkably cheerful despite the very sad life. Both visits were quite sad and very moving. Our next experience was much more uplifting. Our final stop that day was the only Jewish preschool in Vilna. It had room for 50 children ages 2 to 5, with 50 on the waiting list. When we walked into the kindergarten, the children were sitting around 2 tables ready to celebrate Shabbat. 2 children, a boy wearing a man's hat and a girl in a lady's hat, led the service. When our group joined in with the Hebrew, the children looked on in surprise. Together, we sang Sholom Aleichem, a Jewish song known by Jews around the world.
Adonai Melachenu Melech Haolam Chamoitzi Lechem Min Haaretz.
Shabbat Shalom. Before we left home, we were encouraged to bring gifts and supplies for the school. Debbie and I brought silly straws, pencils, painting aprons, paint kits, stickers, and toiletries. The teachers were overwhelmed. By the way, the woman in the picture is the only teacher who is actually Jewish. I need to put into perspective how special this experience was. Up to 95% of Lithuanian Jews were annihilated in the Holocaust. There were kinder actions during which thousands of children were killed. 80 years later, we watch Jewish children thriving and learning and celebrating Jewish traditions. The Great Synagogue of Vilna was built in 1630 after permission was granted to construct a synagogue from stone on the site of an existing synagogue built in 1572. But even before that, the same location had been used for a Jewish house of prayer in 1440. Damaged in World War II by the Nazis, the Great Synagogue was demolished in 1955 by the Soviets, who replaced it with a kindergarten and primary school. At the time of its building, regulations throughout Europe specified that a synagogue could not be built higher than a church. To obey the law and yet create the necessary interior height, it was customary to dig a foundation deep enough for the synagogue's floor level to be well below that of the street. Outside, the synagogue looked to be about 3 stories tall, but inside it reached to over 5. The synagogue was built in Italian Renaissance style with 4 massive columns. Within them was the 3-tiered ornate Rococo bema with a cupola supported by 8 small columns. When I visited in 2012, there wasn't anything left to see, only an empty field. But when I returned in 2018, I was very surprised. A major archaeological research project had begun. In 2015, archaeologists used ground-penetrating radar to pinpoint the historic building's ruins. We took the picture on the left when we were there in September 2018. More than in 2012, but still not much to see. We walked around trying to guess what was what. My cousin said, well, this faces east, so it must be where the bema was. But we really didn't know. By 2019, as you can see in the picture on the right, the team had made major progress. Archaeologists found seating plaques, a floor with a beautiful red and black geometric design, 2 mikvahs, and a cellar underneath the bema, which held a prayer book from before the Holocaust. In addition, there were about 200 coins dating from the 16th to the 20th century and buttons from Napoleon's army left when the French marched through Vilna on their way to Moscow. One of the most exciting finds was the bema's front section, which in the 18th century was 2 stories tall. But the most important discovery was a large inscription that 2 sons had made in honor of their parents in 1796. This inscription was part of a stone Torah reading table that stood on the bema. 2 brothers, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shmuel, honored their mother Sarah and their father, Rabbi Haim, who had emigrated from Lithuania to Eretz Israel and settled in Tiberias. This inscription illustrates the deep connection the Lithuanian Litvak community felt toward the Holy Land. After the excavation of the Great Synagogue, we next visited the only remaining synagogue in Vilna. Okay, time out for 2 vocabulary words, korshul or choral and haskalah. When I heard we were going to visit the choral synagogue, I thought it was something to do with music, but there is no connection. Korshuls were built in Eastern Europe and represented the ideas of Jewish enlightenment known as haskalah, which brought certain reforms to the traditional Jewish customs. Haskalah comes from the Hebrew word sechel, meaning reason or intellect. From the mid-19th century on, Lithuania was the region of Eastern Europe most receptive to haskalah. One of the results of haskalah was the inclusion of secular education in Jewish schools. My maternal grandparents had a yeshiva that taught secular subjects, including instruction in the violin. The haskalah influenced the creation of both the Reform and Zionist movements. The choral synagogue is the only synagogue that is still in use in Vilna. The others were destroyed partly during World War II, when Lithuania was occupied by Nazi Germany, and partly by the Soviets. During the Soviet occupation, the synagogue was nationalized and turned into a metal factory. Restored in 2010, today it holds services and is open to visitors. In 2019, the synagogue, along with the Jewish community headquarters, were temporarily closed due to threats from right-wing groups. The decision coincided with a rise in anti-Semitic rhetoric related to public debate about honoring Lithuanians who collaborated with the Nazis. This is a very, very controversial topic, and I am not going to go into it in this presentation, but it is a problem. The interior of the synagogue is in a Moorish style in pale aqua, gold, rust, and cream, with large and small arches and a high dome ceiling. We visited on Saturday morning, Shabbos. 3 of the men in our group were honored with aliyahs. I loved hearing the service because they used the Ashkenazi pronunciation that we spoke in my congregation when I was growing up. Good Shabbos instead of Shabbat Shalom, which still sounds foreign to my ears. This was the Yiddish of my grandparents. Like all Orthodox synagogues, excuse me, women have to sit separately from the men. We could not use the main door, At a side entrance, we were ushered to a staircase leading upstairs to the women's section. A large area with no curtains or screens overlooked the sanctuary. As second-class citizens, we were not even given prayer books. On our second trip, on display was a matzah-making machine, which had been hidden from both the Nazis and the Soviets. It must have been very difficult to hide because it was huge. Remember Dovid, the Yiddish expert? When we met him early in the day, we had asked if there was anything special Jewish-wise going on in Vilna. And he casually replied, "Oh, they're writing a new Torah tonight at the Choral Synagogue." For us, it was an event we couldn't miss. We were privileged to participate in the momentous occasion. The ceremony, initiated by the synagogue's rabbi, marked the first time since before World War II that Jews in Lithuania would be rewriting their own Torah scroll. The ceremony was dedicated to the unity and well-being of Lithuanian Jews and to deceased family members and all those who were killed and tortured during the Holocaust. Because it was not a religious service, women were allowed in the sanctuary, but as women, we were not allowed to touch the sofer, the scribe. There was a long line to participate, so we participated as a family. Cousin Stan wrote our letter while we symbolically touched each other's arms. This was the perfect ending to our visit in Vilna. We were on our way to Kovno. Founded as a fortress in 1030, Kovno became a town in 1317 and received its charter of self-government in 1408. Thanks to its location on the confluence of two major rivers, the Nemunas and the Neves, Kovno was important for trade. It was frequently attacked by the Teutonic Knights and changed hands several times before the defeat of the Knights in 1410. After that, its trade grew and the town flourished. Despite heavy losses, Kovno remained a center of Lithuanian culture. Following World War II, because the Russian population never exceeded 10%, Kovno had a small advantage. In most of Lithuania, only Russian was taught in schools and was the main language. However, in Kovno, with the small Russian population, Lithuanian was spoken. Kovno is celebrated for its rich cultural and academic life, fashion, Art Deco and Lithuanian national romanticism architectural style, and a widespread cafe culture, all of which contributed to Kovno being designated as the first Central and Eastern European UNESCO City of Design. And Kovno has been selected as the European Capital of Culture for 2022. Maybe a good time to go visit. When Vilna was seized by Poland between 1920 and 1939, Kovno served as the temporary capital of Lithuania. Jews lived in Kovno as early as 1410 when they were brought as prisoners of war. Many of those Jews became active as traders between Kovno and what today is Gdansk, Poland. There were 2,013 Jews living in Kovno in 1847, 16,540 in 1864, 25,441 in 1897, which was 30% of the population, and 32,628 in 1908, 40% of the population. Just prior to World War II, 35,000 to 40,000 Jews lived in Kovno. In 1902, there were over 25 synagogues and Jewish prayer houses in Kovno. Today, only one remains, the second of two operating choral synagogues in Lithuania. Remember, we visited the first in Vilna. The blue and white building combines a neo-Baroque division of facades, neo-Renaissance windows, and a neo-Moorish onion dome. Take a minute and look at the Ark. It is considered to be one of the most beautiful in the world. At the rear of the synagogue is a memorial to the estimated 50,000 Lithuanian Jewish children killed during the Holocaust, complete with 37 stone tablets showing in which towns and cities they lost their lives and just how many of them died in each one. On my second trip, we were in Kovno on Rosh Hashanah and asked our cousins if we could attend services. They weren't sure if there would be a minyan, 10 men, because there are only 20 congregants, and they weren't certain how many would show up. But with Dan, Stan, and another visitor, there were enough. Although there is an upstairs section for the women, we were allowed to sit downstairs, but across the aisle from the men. With a few variations, the Rosh Hashanah service everywhere always includes certain prayers in a set order. But this did not happen in Kovno. Two men stood in front of the Ark reciting prayers, but almost nothing that we recognized. In fact, they kept referring to Shabbat, the Sabbath, not Yom Tov, the holiday. Our services at home last about 2 hours, Erev Rosh Hashanah, and longer Rosh Hashanah day. The service in Kovno was about 15-20 minutes long. We were so happy to be in our ancestral homeland, celebrating with our cousins whose parents survived the Holocaust because they were in Soviet-occupied territory during the war. But it all seemed a bit strange. On reflection, I realized that because up to 95% of Jews of Lithuania had been murdered, and the few survivors lived under Soviet domination, it must have been impossible to worship in the traditional way. And yet so many Litvaks tried as hard as they could to follow their traditions. The very small congregation, mostly men of a mature age, had prepared a beautiful table with white linens and flowers and a meal including all the special holiday foods. The table had one custom new to us, although it turned out to be a very old tradition. 3 fish heads were arranged on glass plates. We learned that at the head of the year, Rosh Hashanah, it is important to eat the head of a fish and not the tail, so that we can be leaders and not followers. At first, everybody was serious, almost solemn, with very little communication. But then, I turned to my first cousin, Roberta, and asked, do you remember the song we used to sing at Rosh Hashanah when we were kids? And we started to sing. And the men and Ella and Asya, our cousins, and everyone joined in. For the next 30 minutes, together we sang every Hebrew and Yiddish song we could remember. The seriousness disappeared. The men became animated, and with gestures and truly beautiful voices, we celebrated being Jewish. All was not lost. Through the food and especially the music, we had found a special connection. Time out for a vocabulary word. Tashlich is a ceremony performed on the afternoon of the first day of Rosh Hashanah. It is a time to symbolically cast off sins of the previous year by tossing pebbles or breadcrumbs into flowing water. Our Rosh Hashanah experience continued as Dan and I and Roberta and Stan left Kovno and headed to the 3rd largest city in Lithuania, Klaipeda. Cousin Ella had told us about a restaurant along the way with don't miss donuts. We stopped there not only for donuts, but for lunch, which we ate outside along a river. Stan had brought a copy of the Tashli service with him, and I had Avinu Malkeinu on my computer. We tossed crumbs from our rolls into the river, casting away our sins, while Barbara Streisand sang in the background. Klaipeda on the Baltic Sea is Lithuania's only seaport. It was part of Germany until after World War I, when Lithuania annexed the entire area. Most of the 141,000 inhabitants were German, and it was recaptured by German troops in 1939 and turned into a military port. Surprisingly, Klaipeda played an important part in our own Revolutionary War, supplying timber for the building of ships. As much as I Googled, I couldn't find out if the timber went to the colonies, to Britain, or to both. Today, shipbuilding is a major industry. The earliest written evidence of Jews in Klaipeda is an edict of 1567, guess what, expelling them from the area. Jews were allowed to come to town only one day a week for commercial purposes, but not to stay there overnight. Then in 1643, the ruler allowed Jewish merchants to stay overnight in the town for the Sabbath. A Dutch Jewish merchant was permitted to settle there in 1664, and soon other Jewish merchants arrived at the fairs. However, for most of the 18th century, Jews were not allowed to live there. It wasn't until the emancipation of Prussian Jews in 1812 that Jews were permitted to return permanently. After World War I, the Jewish population grew rapidly and consisted of two groups, Germans and Litvaks. Not surprisingly, Jews were mainly in commerce. 119 out of 471 shops and businesses and 31 out of 150 factories were owned by Jews. When Germany invaded the region at the beginning of World War II, almost all of Klaipeda's 7,000 Jews managed to escape to Lithuania, where they unfortunately shared the same fate as Lithuanian Jews. After the war, Jews returned, and by 1967, the Jewish population numbered about 1,000. Today, only 300 Jews, mostly of Russian origin, live in Klaipeda. There is only one complete tombstone left in the Jewish cemetery. The Nazis smashed the graves to create a base for a large antenna. The Soviets used the antenna to disrupt anti-Russian radio broadcasts from the West. In 1989, when the antenna were dismantled and tractors demolished the concrete bases, many human bones were exposed. The Jewish community leaders gathered and buried them in a mass grave. This large tombstone in the picture on the right was laid on top. In 1991, a monument commemorating the Holocaust was erected, inscribed in Lithuanian, Hebrew, and Yiddish with the words, "In memory of the Jewish community of Klaipeda that was cruelly annihilated by the Nazis." On the grounds of the cemetery, 39 trees were planted. Every tree is named after the Klaipeda residents who saved Jews during the Holocaust, and today are recognized as the righteous among nations at Yad Vashem. The 4 synagogues were burned and destroyed by the Nazis. No walls remain, but the ruins are preserved, and the government prohibits any building on top of them. Even with only 300 Jews remaining, the town has a kosher grocery store, a modern mikveh, and Torah study. Now it's time for a big confession. When we visited Klaipeda, we had no idea that there had been Jews in the area. Obviously, we hadn't done our research. So instead of visiting the Jewish sites, We spent our one full day exploring a World UNESCO site, the Coronian Spit. I had never heard of the Coronian Spit. I will be very impressed if you know about it. It is a 61-mile-long, thin, curved sand dune spit that separates the Coronian Lagoon from the Baltic Sea. The Russians came in 1795 when they conquered everything. Between wars, it was independent. The Germans owned it during the war, and then the Soviets gained control. And now again, it's part of Lithuania, except for one tiny area, which is still part of Russia. Got that? Today, a lot of Germans live on the Spit, and indeed, we did meet a number of them. More than once, I was asked, Deutsch? And I'd say, Nein. British? Nein. I don't think they ever considered American. In fact, probably few to no Americans come to this place. Sitting in our car, we took a 5-minute ferry ride from Klaipeda to the Spit. Our first stop was a small tourist office hosted by a delightful young woman who showed us the important stops. Before leaving the town, we drove to the end past what once had been a rich fisherman's house with several wooden buildings. His thatch-roofed house, a smokehouse, a cattle shed, and a cold cellar. 2 goats protected the premises. On our drive to the end of the Spit, we happened to find the remains of an incredible sand sculpture competition. The Spit is a big tourist area in the summer, but even though it was only September 8th, tourist spots were already closed. It was cool and windy. Still, it was perfect for touring. Witch's Hill is a natural forested area filled with nearly 100 carved wooden sculptures along a beautiful trail. The original sculptures were mostly carved by the Samogitian, a Lithuanian subgroup of folk artists. The carvings illustrate Lithuanian folk tales, a very fun walk. The Coronian Spit is famous for its sand dunes, the highest moving sand dunes in Europe. Our original plan was to walk on the 3 most famous, but the first one was a long walk to the water, and we decided that one was enough. At the end of the Coronian Spit, there is a sliver of land owned by Russia, but not connected to it. We were afraid of getting too close to the border crossing, particularly since this beautiful fox was guarding it. It was time to head back to Klaipeda. We have come to the end of our visit to Lithuania's 3 largest cities. I have left out some very important sites because I'll be covering them in my final presentation when I talk about Soviet occupation and the Holocaust. But before we get to that, I have a treat for you in my 3rd presentation. We will visit the outlying areas of Lithuania and see authentic shtetls, Jewish cemeteries, and a wooden synagogue. The picture you see is what a famous wooden synagogue looked like in 2012. You won't believe how much it changed when we went back in 2018. We will also meet inspiring Lithuanians who are trying to keep Jewish history alive. Their stories are not to be missed. See you next Sunday when it will be 10 o'clock Pacific Daylight Savings Time. So double check what that will be in your own particular time. Thank you for joining me. And when I figure out how to end screen sharing, we can have questions and comments.
Was that survivor named Fania Bransovsky, the 97-year-old partisan?
I don't remember, but it sounds very possible. I can't remember 100%.
We were there in 2018, 19, and we We were there at the Yom HaShoah at the Panerai Forest.
I can't say yes or no. She was quite elderly. We were told very specifically not to ask her anything about herself. And I don't remember her name.
Yeah, well, she spoke Yiddish, Russian, and Lithuanian.
I'm sure people of her generation all did.
And I said Kaddish in the Coronian Synagogue of Vilna for my father and my sister. Thank you.
In my last presentation, we're going to go to Pinar, where we said Kaddish.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
My paternal grandfather was from Tauroggen. Today, I believe it's called Tauraggi, and was a main industrial area. Did you visit that particular area? Thank you very much.
No, we didn't. At the next presentation, I will go to, I think, about 5 shtetls, but not that one. The interesting thing with the names of places, they have like 3 names. They have a Lithuanian name, oh, actually more. They have a Hebrew name, a Yiddish name, a Polish name. So if you're looking up the land of your family, try all the alternatives, because next time I'm going to talk about Svenciones, where my family came from, and my grandmother called it Svinchon, which is the Yiddish. And the spelling even of Svenciones is spelled with either SV or SW, whether it's, Russian or Lithuanian or it's Polish. So you do see changes in name. Svinchon and Svenciones are pretty dramatic differences.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Is that where you get the name?
Can I ask a question?
Anybody can ask a question, Rana.
Okay. Did you say last week that the Soviets killed 60,000 Jews before World War I?
I think I would have to look up the number, but it wouldn't have been, I don't think it was before World War I. I'd have to check my notes on that.
Mm-hmm. And also, when I was asking how Grandma Molly Antolept entered the United States, she actually went to Duluth, Minnesota, and apparently Duluth is a major port from Canada, and so maybe she entered through there.
Yeah. Well, I think we discussed that. A number of Jews did come through Canada.
Right.
And a lot of my relatives, some are on today, settled in Canada, mostly in Winnipeg or Edmonton.
Also, I had a friend who lived in Lithuania, a Jewish woman, and her passport said Jewish. It didn't say Lithuanian. Does it still work like that?
Passports had various wordings. You might be Hebrew. That was very common. Hebrew, even more than Jewish, is what I see when I'm researching. It might say Russian because depending on when they came, it was really Russia. Some might say Lithuania, some might say Poland, some might say the Ukraine. And as I mentioned, excuse me, last time, you see all the different country names, but it was really the same place. It just, the ruling countries changed, the borders changed. So it's a very big discrepancy.
Thank you. Thank you for this too. I really appreciate it. I'll be back next week.
Good. Yeah, no, I love next week. I am so sorry that one slide I wanted to show disappeared. And I probably will play it at the beginning of the next session, because it is the men in the synagogue singing, and it's just absolutely delightful and wonderful and very moving. But I couldn't find it. So next week at the beginning, I'm going to play it for you, whether you want to see it or not.
No, we want to.
Okay.
Can I ask a question?
We want to see it, yes.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Can I ask a
Shirley,
question?
Wait a minute,
Ella said she can play it.
Ella, you have it?
Hello?
Yes, I googled it. It's Shirley's post on YouTube, but I am not allowed to share the screen right
Oh,
now.
I don't know if Oliver's still there to let
Yep,
you.
I'm still here. Ella, you said you have the video.
Yeah,
Okay, let me go ahead and let you give you sharing permissions, and then you can
Okay.
share that.
okay.
This is worth seeing. It really is.
Moira, quickly.
If you
Um,
weren't on last week, Ella is my cousin in Lithuania that I knew nothing about when I was first there.
Give me one moment.
Still disabled? Yeah, still disabled.
Lithuania, this is
Yep,
a-
give me one moment.
Yeah, what was it?
Shirley,
Yes.
while they're finding that, or are you finding it? While I just want to know, is daylight saving, has it just started this week?
No,
So
it will not start until next Sunday morning at 2 a.m. my time. So you're really going to have to play with it. It won't be 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. It will be 10 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. So it will be an hour
is it-
later. So
it will
now,
be an hour later. Oh,
yeah,
that's good.
now it's 10 to 11 next weekend. This time would be 10 to 12. I suggest you get on really early Sunday morning, whatever time that is for you. And,
I'll check it out. I'll check
and
it out.
check it out. It is
Because
going to be confusing.
Yours started at 8 o'clock tonight here, but next Sunday, in fact, I don't suppose you know about the Isaac Ochberg. Isaac Ochberg, who brought orphans from Lithuania and Russia and Ukraine and Poland to South Africa in 1921, and my father was one of them. And there's a big event happening in Israel, which is going to be zoomed at 7 o'clock our time next Sunday. So there may be a clash. I'll check it out.
Well, this will be put on YouTube, but I'm guessing that what today is 10, next week will be 11 for you, but it's only a guess.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Then the
But
other
everybody,
thing will-
if you
because
would-
yeah, I think it's going to work out.
okay,
Because I think that Zoom thing will be over for the Ochberg event in Israel, and because it's been pushed an hour later, I think it may just work out. Otherwise, the YouTube, I'll watch it on.
Shirley, did you have a special guide that trip?
the first to the second. The first, we went with an organized group, a woman who's very involved in with the Litvak organization here. And she leads groups. I don't know if she's still doing it, but we went with her and then she arranged local guides. When we went in 2018 as a family, our cousins arranged guides for us. And Ella's sister is a guide in Lithuania. And she took us out on the day we went to the shtetls. We did one trip on our own, which we arranged out of Vilna to see some places out of Vilna. So it was a combination.
Okay, thanks.
Brennt a fire und in Stubis Haus. Und der Rebbe lernt kleine Kinder lacht, dem Aleph Beis. Und der Rebbe lernt kleine Kinder lacht, dem Aleph Beis. Zetsche Kinder. In dem Beis Hamikdash in a Winkel Cheder sitzt die Almone Bastion allein. Hier ben Yochidor Yidelen liegt sie Kiseder.
Is that an Israeli who was singing the with the guitar?
No, he is a Lithuanian Jew, a Litvak. He used to sing in Moscow Choral Synagogue, in a choir of Moscow Synagogue. He's a professional musician.
Beautiful, really beautiful.
Ella, do you have them singing L'chaim?
Yeah, that was the last one.
It didn't play. It just said L'chaim and there nothing played.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, don't be. In my final presentation, there will be a recording of a Litvak opera singer who has an incredible voice.
Good, so we will hear that. Lovely.
Yes, yes, yes.
Shirley, this is the first time I've been on. Can you hear me? I just want to thank you. You did a phenomenal presentation. I was born in Lithuania.
Who is this?
My name is Pauline Dror, but my real name is Perla. And your cousin, Asa and Ella, Asa used to be my best friend. We were childhood friends.
I will interrupt, Nina. This is the second sister of my sister. They were so close in childhood. They were just like twins, like sisters. And I always remember Perla. And my daughter visited her while in California. She's very dear to our family. She and her late mother, they were very dear to. It's another story. It's a great story of survival, of strong will, and of immigration from the Soviet Union. Perla Pnina Dror is really an example of the fate of Lithuanian Jewry and Soviet Jewry as well.
Perla, das wird Tina. This is Tina. Last time we met at the Holocaust.
Hi, we met at the Holocaust Museum. That's how we got connected, because I saw a video with Asa's name and I asked you, about her, and you gave me her contact information.
Yeah.
That was years and years ago. Anyway, my mother was a survivor. I was born after the war, and I've been talking for years and years about going back, and your presentation really is making me wanting to go back. And I haven't seen Ella since she was a baby when I left.
Wow. Last time I talked about either doing a special Zoom, and then my daughter said we should make a Facebook page for anybody interested in Litvak. So I'm working on both the Zoom and having a Litvak Facebook page. So those of you who want to connect more can. And I think I have to apologize. Ella, I have always pronounced your sister's name Asia, but I guess that's wrong. So I apologize to you and to her. It's Asa?
No. Asa. It's from Chasa. As you remember, your grandma's sister was Chasa Dveira. So she's named after Chasa.
Yeah, I see the I and I go Asias, but it's Asa.
No, it's Asa, like Asa, but Asa.
If I'm pronouncing it wrong, which I tend to do with some of the words, I apologize. I want to get it right. And Pauline, let me just ask you, where do you live?
I live in Los Angeles.
Okay. All right. Anybody else?
Yes, I have a question and a comment.
Sure.
I'll do the question first and then I'll do the
Could
comment.
I ask you, because I can't see the whole screen at once, could you just tell me your name? And so I can.
My name is Meryl. I'm the one who lived in, well, maybe not the only one, who lived in Lithuania as a Fulbright scholar in 2001.
I remember you.
And so when I was there in the Vilna synagogue, it was being run by the Lubavitches,
Yes.
Straight out of Brooklyn. I was just wondering if that's still the case. And then my comment is that I was able to celebrate Pesach with the Jewish community in Vilna. And it was supported by the Joint Distribution Committee. So I don't get a commission or anything, but I know that when I came home, I started supporting the Joint because the Joint really has provided opportunities for people in Vilna.
I'm so glad you shared that. And I do have a confession. The rabbi at the synagogue is Lubavitch. See, that's one is hard for me to pronounce too. He is from Brooklyn. Now, my rabbi, my dear rabbi, does not love that sect. And it is controversial. And I think it's a controversy in Lithuania right now that I decided to not go into. But I believe there is some conflict between different groups of Jews in Lithuania, which, could be a discussion for a whole other time. The rabbi was delightful. He was charming. He was welcoming. And even though I'm kind of brainwashed to not like that particular Jewish sect, we enjoyed his company. We enjoyed his hospitality. And he is the one that made the writing of the Torah possible. So I'm glad you brought it up.
Thank you.
If I could put in my 2 cents, can you hear me?
Yeah, who are you?
I'm Tammy Hertzbach and I'm in Philadelphia.
Thank you, thank you.
And this was wonderful and I really appreciate it. It really was moving. Anyway, we are Mishnagdim. Litvaks are Mishnagdim. We are not Hasidim. In fact, we even speak Yiddish differently, and we do our prayer service in a different order. So when I see that the synagogue is run by Hasidim, it really troubles me because they're not really bringing back the Judaism of Lithuania. They're bringing a new form of Judaism. So I have a lot of trouble with that.
I can understand. All I can say, and this is just my observation, when we went to the morning Shabbat service, it was very similar to what I have experienced as a Reform Jew. That's all I can share with you. And I know there is a conflict, and I know there is a difference. And again, I have been brainwashed to not accept the other. That's my natural inclination. But I really did enjoy the morning service in 2012. I particularly enjoyed the Ashkenazi pronunciation, as I mentioned, because that's.
Shirley, I just wanted to add that it's not exactly true because the Lubavitch movement actually started in Lithuania. The first Lubavitch Rebbe was Lithuanian. And many of our relatives were Lubavitch. My great-grandfather, Chaim Yehuda, was a Lubavitch. And one of the brothers in our family married into a Lubavitch family, and they settled in Israel. And they're still Lubavitch, and they are not Baal Tshuva. They are the original Lubavitch. And several of them have moved to Queens and run Chabad houses in Queens, and they are our third cousins. So Lubavitch has its roots in Lithuania, and especially in the area that the Antileps came from, the western part of Lithuania and Belarus.
I had no idea, Andrea. Thank you for sharing that. The Hasidim originated in Poland. And as I mentioned,
the Lubavitch sect.
Yeah, no, I mean, but the Hasidim, the general Hasidim, did originate with Baal Shem Tov in Poland. And yeah, but Okay, I'm going to have to be more open-minded then if they're my relatives. I didn't know that. Any other comments? Okay, yeah,
It was so interesting. Thank you so very, very much.
You're
Won't
very
you
welcome.
remind me who your, is it Sybil Castle, who is your South African cousin?
Yeah, Sybil.
Right, and she's not on tonight.
Yes, she is. I'm looking at her right
Yes, she
now.
is. She's there. You got
She
to
hasn't
move your
said
screen.
anything.
Yeah, no, Sybil is there. Roberta, did you want to say something?
Yes, stand it. I was just going to say that the rabbi in Vilnius was doing a fabulous job getting the place restored, helping with education and with the local government there. So when they had writing the Torah, they had TV coverage and tremendous coverage and a big party with fabulous food too. So I would say he's working very hard under difficult circumstances to really try and improve the Jewish life in Vilnius.
And we of the liberal reform movement and of the conservative movements, we aren't sending anybody to Vilna.
Stan was our cousin who wrote in the Torah. You may recognize his picture, but he was the one who actually did it while we held on to each other to be part of it. The whole topic of the different sects in Lithuania is very complex, and I am not going to be covering it any more than I have, but if you're interested, Google is wonderful and you can look into it. When we were in Kovno, we had a guide. This was 2012, and we were trying to find out about where we could go to services. And I just kind of remember him being very critical of the Choral Synagogue. And they're maybe Ella can clarify it in a text or something, but there's definitely an undercurrent, or it seemed that way to me.
May I ask you something? Absolutely. You mentioned that the right wing are becoming anti-Semitic in Lithuania. Was it just in the one town?
Oh, no. And Ella, correct me if I'm wrong. This is my understanding. And I'll talk about it a lot in my final presentation. But when you go to Lithuania, the very first hour I was there, I knew that the Lithuanians, not the Litvaks, but the Lithuanians feel the Holocaust pales in comparison to the Soviet occupation. And I'll talk more about it in the fourth presentation.
Okay. All right.
But what has happened is the Lithuanian government is recognizing and honoring Lithuanians who have done good for Lithuania, but they were German collaborators and they helped the Nazis. So obviously the Litvaks are not happy about this. Ella, is that about it, or could you add to that?
Maybe next time when you will be speaking about
I'm going to talk about it.
Okay. It's a long story and a very controversial story. It's not for an addition. It's just to cover it. It's a long story. And Shirley will definitely be more precise the next time when she presents the Holocaust in Lithuania.
It won't be the next presentation. It'll be my final presentation. And as long as I have you, I just have to say, I hope you will watch the final presentation. Yes, it is on the Holocaust and it is on Soviet occupation, but it is honestly the most interesting of the four presentations. And it's where you'll hear Ella's story firsthand, where you'll hear the Russian opera singer, where you will meet many, many Lithuanians who helped the Jews. Now, there were the Lithuanians, there were many who were horrible and were complicit, but I am highlighting some who did help the Jews. So don't, please, I had this discussion with a friend of mine. He says, Holocaust, I'm not tuning in. And I said, you have to. First of all, you have to bear witness. Secondly, it's history. And third, you just have to know some of the story. I think it's very important. I tried very hard not to make a horrible subject horrible. I tried to present facts and make it palatable. So I do hope you will continue to the last presentation, not because I'm doing it, but because I think it's information you should have.
May I ask one more question?
Absolutely.
Your cousin Ella,
yes,
did her family remain in Lithuania through all this time?
Ella, do you want to answer? Or do you want me to answer?
Both of my parents were born in Lithuania, and luckily or not, my father was sent to Stalin's Gulag, to Stalin's labor camps, and he survived the World War II, the Holocaust this way. And my mother's family managed to escape to Soviet-occupied territory in Uzbekistan. And me and my sister were born after the war, and we still live in Lithuania.
Well, that's interesting because my cousin, I don't know if it's a time to tell all this now, but my father, one of the brothers survived. He was brought here as a child, as an orphan child after the First World War, my father. The rest of his family were murdered in Sobibor, we think. One brother crossed over from Poland, landed up with his family at the Stalin in Siberia in a camp. They were there for about 6 months. They then trekked around and went to Uzbekistan. And from Uzbekistan, eventually after the war, they were then brought into a German displacement camp and then brought to Israel. So that brother survived with his family, but they went through the whole Stalin camps and Uzbekistan, and they were eating grass to survive and God knows what. So
well, yeah.
Who knows if they met your family?
When we had our reunion in New York, I did a booklet on the stories. Anybody who wanted to send in a family story, and they were so moving and so interesting. I wish there was a way I could take your stories and put them into some kind of soft book. If you want to send them to me, that's something that I can do, because we all have these incredible, moving stories. So if you have my email, you can type up your story and I'll see if I can reproduce them and send them to you in some way. Or you can, once I have the Lithuanian website up and running, you can post them there. And that might be even a better way to go to share, because otherwise these stories are going to be lost with our generation and our children's generation. I know we're all different generations, but my grandkids who are in their 20s, they're not going to perpetuate these stories. So I really strongly recommend that you write them down for yourselves and your families, if not for anybody else. And I'll let you know when the website's up, and if you so choose, you can publish them.
Thank you.
Rana?
Yes. Are we going to talk about, this is more of a family thing, the spelling of the last name with an E, 2 E's, or?
Yeah, I think let's talk about that on our Antolep page.
Okay, good.
And next time, Rana, we're going to go to Antilepti, where our name probably came from. So
okay. And Ella, what is your maiden name? She's still there?
Guterman.
Guterman? Guterman.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you again for joining. And I apologize for any mispronunciations or any incorrect information.
You were marvelous.
I'll hear from you if I did something wrong, and I'll let you know.
Shirley, you're wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're
really
welcome.
terrific. All right. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye.
Figure out the timing next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I'll check out the time.
Hi, Sybil.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hi, Sybil.
Bye, bye.
Hi, Sybil Castle in Cape Town.
Ooh, that's hello, Wilfred and Trudy.
What is it?
Yeah.
Yes.
So good to see you, Sybil. Wonderful.
Thank you. I didn't realize. Oh, good. Lovely.
It was such a wonderful session. Thank you for telling us about it.
Oh, I'm happy to see you.
I can't hear
Yeah,
you.
can't hear you. Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Happy to see you.
Hi, Sybil.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Hi, Margie.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Shirley. That was so amazing. Thank you once
You're
again.
very welcome. It's a pleasure.
I've got a lot of
Shirley.
followers,
And
got a
we
lot
will-
of followers from
listen to
South
you next
Africa.
Sunday.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Bye.
they are. I'm another one.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Quick question.
Yes?
Bye,
Steph.
everyone.
Did somebody have a question?
I did. It's Steph in Toronto. Hi.
Oh, hi, Steph. How are you?
You're texting my sister, who tells me that our grandmother was from Vilnius, but my mom's mom died when my mom was 5, and she grew up in the first Jewish orphanage in the US in Philadelphia. So all we know is that her name was Sarah Sandler when she was here. Is there a way of, or here, not Canada, US, is there a way of somehow tracing something back?
Yeah, it's possible through Jewish genealogy using various tools. If you have a name that's not terribly common, if you have birth dates, any information you have can lead to other information that can take you to more information. And that's basically how I connected with my Antelope family worldwide. But I had a pretty good amount of information to start with. So you and I can talk, okay?
Another time. I was just, so I didn't mean to be rude texting while everybody was on, but it's like my sister and I were going back and forth with that.
I don't even see the text. Debbie is monitoring the text, so I don't see them. I'm easily distracted when I do this, as you can see.
I was texting. So anyway, nice seeing all of you again. I'll see you next week. Okay, and Shirley, thank you so much. We'll talk during the week.
We will. Bye-bye, Steph. Okay, I'm going to end this unless somebody doesn't want me to, but I think I will. See you next Sunday, 10 o'clock Pacific. Oh, there was a shtetl in Lithuania. Ooh, okay.
Did you know the book, Dusiat?
No, I don't. But thank you. I will look into it. I've read a lot of books, but obviously not all. I'm going to mention 2 books that I think are worth reading in my final presentation, but I'm definitely going to put that in my notes. Right now, I'm going to end the session. There was a shtetl in Lithuania. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Bye,
So
everybody.
wonderful talk you gave.
Thank you.